All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started early. My name is Pierre Rochard. I'm the co-founder of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. So the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, I co-founded with Michael Goldstein back in 2014. You can find him on X at Bitstein. And you can also find the Nakamoto Institute on X, and you can find us at nakamotoinstitute.org. If you're really interested in Bitcoin, which hopefully everybody in this room is very interested in Bitcoin, I'd encourage you to go on the Institute's website and to click around, start reading, because there is lots of content. There's content from cypherpunks before Satoshi that he drew inspiration from and cites in his white paper. There's all of Satoshi's writings from the white paper to all the emails. And there's also lots of what we could call a thought leadership around Bitcoin and its history. So check out the mempool. I myself have some articles on there. We have a podcast. We need more Bitcoin podcasts, so we created a podcast that is the Reorg, where Michael and I, we look back at some articles that we wrote 10 years ago, and we see how they held up to the test of time, right? Thank God they do hold up to the test of time because Bitcoin's still around, right? Okay, so today's presentation is about mining economics, and we have to start our economics conversation, first of all, with what is the value of Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin has no value, then neither does mining. So it really solves a crucial problem in society, which is this central banking experiment we've had, where we put all of our trust into these central planners, in our case in Washington, D.C. at the Eccles building, all these PhDs to manage the money, and then they betray that trust by printing way too much money. And this inflation causes what is called a Cantillon effect, where those who are closest to the new money benefit from it, and those who are furthest away from the new money pay the cost, right? So that's us plebs out here in middle America experiencing this outrageous inflation, while New York and Washington, D.C. thrive off of the currency debasement. So this has caused a tremendous increase in wealth inequality. Lots of political polarization and political problems are downstream of that. It also just makes it hard for us to invest, right? Where we're constantly seeing the purchasing power of our checking account or the $100, $20 bills, or in my case, $5 bills in our wallets, constantly losing value. And that pushes us to either quickly go out and put the money to work, right? Your financial planner will tell you, hey, don't just sit on this melting ice cube. You need to go find investments. And as we saw with the 2008 subprime mortgage loan problem, sometimes those investments are suboptimal and cause lots of losses. Okay, so I won't get into gold. Gold is old, but the problem with gold is that it gets centralized, right? And so we saw that the custody of gold centralized to this little building here, Fort Knox, which is protected by nuclear weapons and the U.S. military. But Bitcoin actually solves all of these problems in 3 different ways. So let's start with the transparency. Bitcoin's software, the code, is completely open source. So anybody can go onto github.com/Bitcoin/Bitcoin and see all of the protocol rules as they actually operate, right? Not as a promise on a marketing website. There is no Bitcoin CEO, there's no Bitcoin corporation, there's no proprietary software where there's a black box and you have to guess what's going on inside of it. No, this is all public and anybody can contribute to it as well. Lots of people have contributed lots of improvements to Bitcoin over the past 13 years since Satoshi kind of released it into the wild. And of course, also, in addition to the software code being open source, all of the transactions on the Bitcoin ledger are also out in the public. So when you compile the code and you run a Bitcoin node, which you can do on any kind of hardware, you could even do it on your phone if you want to kill your battery, but you can do it on your laptop or on your desktop or a server. It's actually very efficient software. Complete diametric opposite of Bitcoin mining, which we'll get into. But when you do that, it downloads the entire history of Bitcoin's ledger. So it takes a look at all of the transactions that have occurred since 2009 and checks them against the rules of the protocol to make sure that nobody is creating invalid transactions that give themselves money or other nefarious things like that they're not allowed to do. So this leads us to the accountability aspect of Bitcoin. So with tremendous freedom comes great responsibility. That means that when you're running a node, you're not just your own bank, you're actually your own central bank. You are tapping into the monetary backbone technology that is peer-to-peer. So you are now a peer on the network, and you are equal to BlackRock, Coinbase, you're equal to all the Bitcoin mining companies, right? So there's no power dynamic where they have some kind of authority that would allow them to impose their will upon you. Now, this also applies to holding the private keys. So the private keys are what are securing your Bitcoin. So your Bitcoin are actually not in your wallet. Your Bitcoin are in everybody's node software. So my node is also keeping track of your Bitcoin. Okay, keep that in mind. And that when you're wanting to spend your Bitcoin, you take your private keys out of cold storage, you sign a message, and that is what authorizes you to unlock those Bitcoin and then send them to a different Bitcoin address. If you lose your keys, there is no support line to call, or at least there's no official one, right? Of course, everybody has a friend. Me personally, I call Jimmy Song. He bails me out. But the point being that if you really lose your keys, if terrible boating accident, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, there's no way to recover the Bitcoin. There's no way to reverse a transaction and to undo a past mistake. You're really playing with a firearm, right? There's no undo button. And so that does mean that when you shoot a transaction, you better be aiming it in the direction that you want it to go. Third is reliability. This is what distinguishes Bitcoin from, well, of course, from all the fiat centralized systems, but also to all the other cryptocurrencies out there. So Bitcoin's ethos from a software engineering perspective, from the architecture of the system, is about decentralization that removes all single points of failure. So this is what allows Bitcoin to be the most reliable monetary system in the history of humanity. This is also something that the Bitcoin developer community is keenly aware of. And the development philosophy around Bitcoin is very conservative and focused on the security and stability of the system. It's not interested in creating innovation for innovation's sake, right? Innovation always has to be towards the ends of helping users accomplish what they want with their money. And the other cryptocurrencies that you might hear about out there, they are always looking for ways to differentiate themselves from Bitcoin in order to be able to compete, right? If another cryptocurrency is identical to Bitcoin, it has zero chance of ever capturing market share versus Bitcoin. They have to fiddle with their architecture and move away from this conservative philosophy and move towards a more break things and kind of make it up as you go approach, which I don't think is appropriate for money, but it's certainly appropriate for their marketing strategies around increasing their adoption. So when it comes to Bitcoin, this is really, I think, what what distinguishes Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies. These fundamentals have led to Bitcoin's astronomical growth. So this is just over the past 5 years. Bitcoin has gone from a market cap of less than $250 billion to now it is around $1.6 trillion, assuming it has not crashed in the past 30 minutes. So this really shows that while Bitcoin's price may be volatile day to day, if we zoom out, what we see is a process of value accrual that is driven by those three fundamentals. Okay, so how does mining fit into the Bitcoin system? Bitcoin mining is actually a very small subset of the Bitcoin system. Sometimes you'll hear Bitcoin mining executives and others try to kind of play up their role in the system of, oh, we're securing the blockchain. Well, not quite. I would argue that the blockchain is secured by the nodes. Your Bitcoin are secured by your private keys. And that the purpose of Bitcoin mining is really limited to, first of all, the new issuance of adding Bitcoin to the ledger, right? So when Satoshi launched Bitcoin, there were no Bitcoin on the ledger. And thus, it would have been impossible to have any kind of movement of Bitcoin, any kind of transactions. The alternative to issuing Bitcoin through the mining process would be to kind of just, Satoshi giving himself the Bitcoin, right? We see lots of other cryptocurrencies where that's exactly the approach they have. They just do a keystroke, give themselves the Bitcoin, the XRP, or the Ethereum or whatever else it is, which is really akin to how fiat currencies come into existence, right? The Federal Reserve does a keystroke, Jeremy Powell gives himself $100 trillion, and then he's the wealthiest man in the world. So the issuance process is very important because having it go through the Bitcoin mining system means that the issuance is hyper-competitive, and we'll see how that manifests itself later. But this prevents what economists describe as seigniorage profits. So seigniorage profits are the profits that you get by having a monopoly on the issuance of currency. And Bitcoin has no monopoly on the issuance of currency. It's very competitive, so there is no seigniorage profits. The second economic purpose of Bitcoin mining is about transactions. So providing the sequential ordering of transactions to get added to the ledger such that there is no double spending of Bitcoin. This is what Satoshi describes in his Bitcoin white paper. Arguably, it's the only thing he describes in his white paper. People hold up the white paper as some kind of spec of the entire system, but actually it's very narrowly focused on this question of, can you have a decentralized clock, a time-stamping server that is ordering transactions so that people aren't double spending? And this is the source of revenue of transaction fees for Bitcoin miners. So every time you send a Bitcoin transaction, you pay a little fee, or sometimes a big fee, depends on the congestion on the network, to the Bitcoin miners, and then they add your transaction to a block. So this is where Bitcoin mining revenue comes from. The sum of new issuance plus transaction fees is the mining reward. This is a chart of the mining reward over Bitcoin's life. So you can see in orange is the new issuance of Bitcoin that are getting paid to the Bitcoin miners. And in blue, you see the transaction fees. So obviously, the transaction fees are a tiny percentage of the total reward. Usually, it's somewhere between 1% and 5%. People have lots of theories about how this will evolve over time. My own personal view is that transaction fees will just continue to be volatile depending on conditions on the network of how many people are trying to send transactions. And that actually this has zero impact on the overall security of the system, because transaction finality, ultimately, it's about whether you're getting censored or not. And if you are getting censored, what you can do is increase your transaction fee to get uncensored, because the Bitcoin mining hash rate is an open set. So anytime you incentivize new participants will show up. Okay, so this might also look like the Bitcoin mining industry has shrunk over the past years, right? Going from 16 years, going from million, Bitcoin per quarter to less than 100,000. But we have to multiply this Bitcoin quantity by the Bitcoin price. Now, before we do that, I do want to show that every 4 years, you might notice that the issuance kind of gets cut in half. And this is the Bitcoin halvings. So every 210,000 blocks, there's a block every 10 minutes. That means that approximately every 4 years, the new Bitcoin getting added to the ledger gets cut in half. When Satoshi started Bitcoin, it was 50 Bitcoin per block. And then it went to 25, 12.5, 6.25. Most recently, it got cut to 3.125 Bitcoin last year. And so then in the year 2028, that will get cut in half again. That will continue to happen until the year approximately 2140, when the last Satoshi, that is a fraction of a Bitcoin, gets mined. Okay, so let's multiply the Bitcoin quantity by the dollar price. The dollar price, as you might have heard, is very volatile. So that volatility, I think, has been driven by a lot of different factors. One of them is the halvings. So it seems like in the past, every time there's been a Bitcoin halving, that has caused a supply shock in the market and has caused a bull market for Bitcoin. So this chart is indexed on when the halving occurred, and then looking at the days after the halving, right? The 4 years after the halving. And you can see that in the first 2 years, it seems like there's a big run up in the Bitcoin price. And then, of course, there's a correction, and then things kind of drift up at the end of the halving. So this cycle is at the bottom left, the fourth cycle that we're currently living through. It is the worst performing halving cycle in Bitcoin's history. Will that continue? I don't know. I think not. I think that Bitcoin's price is going to go up. But nevertheless, let's multiply this dollar price by the Bitcoin, and you get the Bitcoin mining reward on a quarterly basis in dollar terms, which is basically, it looks like the mirror image of the previous chart that showed in Bitcoin terms, right? Because the Bitcoin price has gone up so much that even though the mining reward has gotten cut in half every 4 years, if the price 10x's, then the dollar value going to the mining industry increases on net. So now we're in the $3 billion range per quarter of top line revenue for the Bitcoin mining industry that then gets divvied up among all the participants. Before we get into that, let's talk about what Bitcoin mining is, and let's talk about hash. So a hash is the fundamental unit of Bitcoin mining, is a one-way cryptographic function where you put any kind of data into the function, and then you get a fixed length output. And anytime you put that same data through the same hash function, you will get the same result. So it's deterministic. But if you put in different data, you get a completely different result. And so that's where it's also random. Now, what Bitcoin miners are doing is that they are putting metadata about Bitcoin blocks, called a block header, through the hash function. And they're trying to do it enough times to be able to guess a hash that has a certain value. So let's talk about orders of magnitude before we continue. So when we talk about 1 kilo hash per second, that's 1,000 per second. A measure you might hear in the industry is 1 terahash per second. So that's 1 trillion. And then when you're looking at macro, how much Bitcoin mining is happening globally, the order of magnitude we talk about is exahash, which is 1 quintillion hashes per second. So really astronomical numbers. Okay, so when the Bitcoin miners are hashing, they take the block header, they pass it through all of their mining rigs, and the mining rigs are changing the data a little bit every time they hash in order to generate a new random hash, because they are trying to find a needle in a haystack. Every 2 weeks worth of blocks, so every 2016 blocks, the network of Bitcoin nodes, which is actually verifying the work being done by the Bitcoin miners. So a Bitcoin miner is just proposing a block, right? There's no way that they can force the rest of the network to accept that block if it's violating the rules of the protocol. But the nodes, when they receive that 216th block, they look back and see, okay, how quickly have blocks been coming in over the past approximately 2 weeks? And if blocks have been coming in too quickly, that is that maybe it's been 12 days instead of 14 days, they will increase the difficulty of Bitcoin mining. So they'll make it harder to find that needle in the haystack. And what they're doing is they're calibrating that decentralized clock so that it ticks every 10 minutes on average, no matter what is happening in terms of the amount of hash rate that is being applied to the mining process. So when we talk about proof of work, the work that we're talking about is all of the hashes that were discarded because they did not meet the necessary target. And the proof is the one hash that does get found that has a sufficient difficulty to it, that is the needle that they found. And the haystack is just the work. And so this proof does indicate to the nodes that essentially they've put in that work. Okay, so when Bitcoin miners are doing this search, they often team up with other Bitcoin miners using mining pools. This allows them to smooth their revenue over time so that they're not subject to too much variance in the reward that they are earning. The mining pools broadcast the winning block header and hash out to all the Bitcoin nodes, where it goes through a verification process. And if that passes the verification process, then the nodes update what is called the UTXO set, which is essentially the balance sheet of everybody's Bitcoin addresses, right? So what is the current balance of each address gets maintained in this UTXO set. And so that allows you, if you add up all of the UTXOs, which are unspent outputs that represent Bitcoin, if you add all that up, you want to make sure that it's always below 21 million, right? And that it is following Bitcoin's monetary policy. A little Easter egg here is that when Satoshi released Bitcoin, he actually had a fundamental flaw in the central part of the system, which was, do you go with the longest chain or the most work chain? That is, do you choose the chain that has the most blocks, or do you choose the chain that has the most hash rate? And he actually mistakenly put the most blocks. Researchers then found that, hey, look, you should certainly do it with the most hash rate. And so you see here that Satoshi was not some kind of omniscient God being. Rather, he was a flawed human like the rest of us. And he did actually have mistakes in Bitcoin software. But the beauty of open source is that those mistakes were fixed and that we continue trucking along. A metric you'll hear in the mining industry is hash price. So hash price is where you take what's the total reward going to the Bitcoin miners. You divide it by the global hash rate so that you can have a reward per petahash second per day. If you Google hash price, you'll be able to find this chart. It shows here that hash price is abysmal currently. Maybe that'll change in the future, but don't count on it because Bitcoin mining is the most competitive industry in the world. Now, how do Bitcoin mining rigs stack up against each other? Because on the market, there's lots of different models. One metric you can look at is their efficiency. That is their joules per terahash. So per unit of electricity, how much hash rate or how many hashes are you generating? And you can see that you want the lowest number here, right? Where you're using the least amount of energy to produce a terahash. And so the lowest number is 12 by Bitmain, their latest Antminer S21 XP Hydro. It was released a couple of years ago. And so on and so forth. So Something that researchers have found that's really interesting is that you can actually fingerprint different mining rigs. So you can look at those winning hashes, the proofs that are part of each block, and you can actually back into which mining rig produced that winning block. And so they took these fingerprints and then applied them to the network, and they were able to show what mining rigs have the most market share. And you can see here that the S19 has been the most popular Bitcoin mining rig, but obviously the newer mining rigs are gaining market share as well over time as they replace the S19, which results in the overall Bitcoin network efficiency, right? So looking at the global joules per terahash of the network, going down and down and down. Although lately it's actually flattened out, which is an interesting dynamic. Maybe it has to do with the fact that Bitcoin mining rigs, the chips inside of them, the ASICs, are reaching the state of the art of semiconductor technology. And so maybe it's the case that going forward, squeezing out hardware efficiency is going to be harder and harder. You can multiply this number by the hash rate and get to a global gigawatt electricity consumption. So on a global basis, how much electricity does Bitcoin mining consume? And it is currently north of 25 gigawatts. To put that into perspective, the Texas grid, ERCOT, usually operates between 50 and 80 gigawatts. So, if you were to bring all the Bitcoin mining in the world to Texas, it would still only be a fraction of the grid's output. Okay, so let's look at now, I think economically what's really interesting is the marginal revenue. So how many dollars do you get per megawatt hour of for different mining rig models? So here you see, I went back all the way back to 2018 when the S9 was around. Do we have any S9 OGs in the room? Yeah, we got, wow, all right, okay. I don't know why you guys are even here. You already know all this information. They were earning at the peak, right? So December 2017, if you had an S9 plugged in, you were earning $2,000 per megawatt. And then lots more people plugged in S9s. The Bitcoin price crashed, and so that figure also fell sharply. In the 2021-22 bull market, you had the profitability of the S19 and S17, of course, be pretty elevated. So people were making like $400 per megawatt. Since then, let's zoom in at the bottom right because these numbers get small. Now the state of the art, right? The S21 is earning between $150 and $200 a megawatt, and the older generations of S19s and S9s are earning much less than that. So this is really an interesting number from a grid operator perspective because this is actually the break even for Bitcoin miners in the sense that if on a marginal basis, if the price of electricity goes above this number in real time, then Bitcoin miners have a natural incentive to turn off their mining rigs. Otherwise, they are losing money, and nobody wants to lose money. I'll illustrate this phenomenon here in Texas. This is August of 2023. Was anyone here in Texas August of 2023? Yes, all right. We've got some Texans here. And that was a particularly hot summer, and that was a particularly hot August. So what we saw here, you might have gotten some text messages from ERCOT saying, hey, conservation alert, turn off your air conditioning and sweat it out. And that was because we did not have, or we came very close to not having enough power generation for the state and to have, rolling blackouts. But if we look at what were the incentives for the Bitcoin miners? Well, in red, you have the price of the electricity. The price of electricity is actually far more volatile than the Bitcoin price, and it's more volatile than Bitcoin mining break-evens because it spikes up in the evening when the sun has set. It's 8 p.m. and solar generation goes to zero. Natural gas power plants are on their last legs because they've been running overclocked all summer. And the wind is not picking up yet. And so everybody still has their AC on because it's still 110 degrees outside. And that is really when you see these moments of the electricity price going from, it might be $20 per megawatt during the afternoon, and then suddenly in the evening it spikes up to $5,000 a megawatt. So way above the break even for Bitcoin miners. The scale on the left is actually log scale, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see what's going on if I had it on a linear scale. So anytime the red line is above the black line, Bitcoin miners, if they stay on, lose money. And even if they're hedged, because if they're hedged, they lose money in the sense that they could have turned off and gotten paid by their hedge. And so in any case, they are mining uneconomically, and they have every incentive in the world to curtail and turn off their mining rigs. Another interesting situation where this occurred was with the total solar eclipse that occurred on April 8th of, I believe that was last year. I remember I was driving on the road and people were like pulled over on the side of the road. You know, they're clearly tourists who came for a total solar eclipse, which I don't know why you would do tourism around solar eclipses, but that's fine. So this caused power generation from solar to also go to zero in the middle of the day. And what we saw was that the price of electricity skyrocketed above the break-even of most Bitcoin miners at the time was $149 per megawatt. And so you see in that shaded blue background, the power draw of Bitcoin miners, their load consumption dropped as the price of electricity went up. And then once the price of electricity went back down because the solar eclipse ceased, that they turned on their mining rigs and came back online. And so this really illustrates the tremendous flexibility that Bitcoin miners have, where they're able to, on a minute-by-minute basis, respond to the real-time price of electricity on the grid. And this has a lot of value for the grid operator, because the alternative would be, for example, turning on a natural gas power plant for 30 minutes, which is very expensive to do. Especially when you factor in the fact that you have to have a natural gas power plant laying around, idling for the rest of the year for that 1% peak condition. So it makes a lot more sense to have Bitcoin miners that have such a low break even that they start turning off very early, and that frees up electricity for everybody else who's running a hospital or running their AC at home or whatever it is. Now, when we look at the overall profile of electricity prices here in Texas, it's not always the case that they are high, right? In fact, one of the beauties of Bitcoin mining isn't just that it turns off when there's a lot of demand for electricity from other users on the grid, it's that it also turns on when there's very little demand from all the other users on the grid, and it absorbs excess capacity. In purple at the bottom, you see that's the price range of negative to $0. So why does Texas sometimes have negative electricity prices? It's because there's so much wind and solar that's producing, and they are happy to produce at a negative electricity price because they get a subsidy from the federal government where they get this production tax credit. And so they'll produce electricity at a negative price because they know that on their taxes, they will get paid for it. And even beyond that, if we look at the blue of $0 to $20, there's still lots of times in what we call the shoulder months, right? So this is where it's springtime, it's 70 degrees outside. You'd have to be crazy to turn on your AC. There's no reason to have your AC on, right? And so there's just a massive excess amount of electricity on the system, and that actually is a problem. It sounds like it's nice to have, but it's a problem because that means that the power companies that are generating the electricity, they are not earning a revenue. And so they have all of these fixed costs, all of this infrastructure, all of this transmission and distribution, all of these power plants, and they're not getting paid for it. And so they have to then go to the government and say, hey, if you want us to keep the lights on during that less than 1% of the time, right, those peak hours, you have to give us a subsidy. You have to bail us out, because otherwise the economics don't make sense. We will leave your state and we will go produce electricity somewhere else. So Bitcoin miners provide a steady stream of revenue for power generation companies to be able to pay for their fixed costs and to stay in the market and to be there when we need them the most, right, during that August. And you see here on the chart, you've got August towards the middle there. Clearly, you've got all those red prices, all those hours where electricity prices were very expensive. And so they can't make the economics work if they only make their money in August, right? They've got to make money year round, and Bitcoin miners help them accomplish that. Another way to look at this is what percentage of any given month were Bitcoin mining rigs turned off, right? Because you also have to look at it from the Bitcoin miner's perspective. You don't want to be turned off, 90% of the time either, right? So you want to have your capital being put to use and earning money. But you see here that it really is the case that most months you're on more than 95% of the time. And so you are earning money. And it is in the exceptional months like August, where it made sense to be off 20% of the time, or February of 2021. Who survived Winter Storm Uri here? Who had their power out? I sure did. And I was at home with a newborn baby. And so that was very stressful for my wife and I. But thank God all the Bitcoin miners were turned off, because the electricity price is a free market. And so the price being very elevated incentivized the Bitcoin miners to stay off during that time and incentivize power generators to come on. So you can see that when we think about, does it make sense to hedge your power costs as a Bitcoin miner? It really depends on a lot of other factors of where do you think electricity prices are going to be in the future? Would you rather what is called a ride the index of saying, okay, I'm not going to hedge, because if I hedge, that means I'm going to be paying more during the shoulder months. I'm just going to accept the market price, and then I will curtail when it is too expensive. Or, if you're looking at the forward curve and you're looking at the market and you say, well, electricity prices in the future are very inexpensive, so I am going to hedge. That way I can lock in that cost now. That can make sense as well. So when we look at Bitcoin mining here in Texas and we compare it to the global Bitcoin mining hash rate, it's really interesting. Both have been growing a lot. But if we look at the market share, it's actually been very stable. That Texas represents approximately 15% of the global hash rate. And that, I think that going forward will stay the same. And it's an interesting question of why is it that Texas has attracted so many Bitcoin miners? One is the stick, which is that China banned Bitcoin mining. And so lots of them came over here in 2021. The other is the carrot. That is the market dynamics here, where Texas policymakers have very intentionally created a free market for electricity so that they're not picking winners and losers. They're technology agnostic. They're not making a value judgment of, oh, we don't like Bitcoin, it's too speculative, so we're not going to let Bitcoin miners develop, gigawatt scale, industrial scale mining facilities here. No, they have the opposite approach of let's let the market figure this out, and then let's connect everyone, and let's make sure that we are focused on reliability and not trying to stifle innovation. So when they look at reliability, what they want to make sure is that what I just advertised, that Bitcoin miners turn off during peak times, is what actually occurs, right? Because if that does not happen, then not only do they have an electrical engineering problem of blackouts and brownouts, they also have a political problem, and they saw this after Winter Storm Uri. The public expects the lights to be on. It's non-negotiable, right? The reliability is something that is paramount, and that, if we don't have a reliable electricity grid, not only do we have lost economic opportunities, people's lives are at stake, right? People can die from extreme heat, extreme cold, not having, the lights working when they're driving around, and all the infrastructure that relies on electricity. So they have emphasized that for the sake of the state and for the sake of the mining industry, it's very important to have very close cooperation between the grid operator, ERCOT, and the Bitcoin miners. And so there's actually programs around this that formalize that relationship around controllable load resource, where the grid operator can actually have a direct line of control with the Bitcoin miners and be able to communicate with them directly that, hey, putting aside the price of electricity, for achieving our reliability mandate, we need you to turn off, right? Or actually, sometimes the opposite happens, where they'll ask a Bitcoin miner to turn on and to stay on. And so when you think about grid reliability, it's not just about those peak times. Every second of every day, ERCOT has to manage supply and demand on the electricity grid, because they have to make sure that the grid operates at the correct frequency, 60 hertz per second. Okay, so the electricity is oscillating 60 times per second. And if that does not stay at 60 hertz, plus or minus 1 or 2 hertz, depending on your risk tolerance, then you get problems. You get physical problems, right? Where power lines melt, or people's electronics go haywire. And so every second of every day, the grid operator is making sure that supply and demand are exactly equal. And they have lots of tools at their disposal, including Bitcoin mining rigs now. So when you're participating in, for example, frequency response, that's where the grid operator is delegating to you and saying, okay, keep an eye on the frequency, and if it goes outside this band, turn on a mining rig. If it goes outside that band, turn off a mining rig. And so Bitcoin miners are helping stabilize the grid at a macro level of season to season and providing that capacity, but also at a micro level of making sure that all of the electronics and the modern grid infrastructure that we rely on is functioning. So for all those who are Bitcoin miners in the room, thank you for your service. Thank you for helping with grid reliability. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found it informative.